Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Today I wanted to talk about a scandal that's developed in the political world in New York. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard that New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has gotten himself into a bit of trouble lately as a result of scandals revolving around his handling of COVID, where he allowed people who had been infected with COVID uh, who were nursing home residents to be sent back into nursing homes before they were fully recovered and possibly infecting many other people, and also got legislation passed that shielded nursing homes, among others, from any liability for COVID related deaths. And also, and interestingly, um, this has gotten a lot more attention. He has finally had his history of harassing women, which he had a reputation of for years and years, catch up with him as three women came out with their stories of him allegedly harassing them. So, so I wanted to take a look at the details of those scandals today, as well as try and gain some perspective on why it is that uh, Mr. Cuomo appears to be pretty vulnerable when that doesn't seem to be the case, unfortunately, for a lot of other powerful people who do horrible things. So, and I've covered this issue a lot on this show of sexual harassment and assault, sexual misconduct, because it's something that really pisses me off to see um, people get away with this when they're in a position of power, just because they're not only their allies but other people who really should know better. People who think of themselves as progressive and defenders of women and so forth, uh, you just kind of give the person a pass or even attack accusers and so forth. And, we've talked about that a lot. But anyway, let's take a look at what's going on with Governor Cuomo. So, David Sirota, who was associated with Bernie Sanders' campaign and is a journalist, came out with an article recently that compared the scandal revolving uh, Cuomo's administration underreporting COVID deaths and shielding uh, the healthcare industry from any liability regarding COVID through legislation. Uh, he compared the scandal to the scandal around Richard Nixon when Nixon tried to cover up attempts by his associates to smear the Democratic Party. And Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers. So, it may, maybe it really is going to get that big. Although this particular scandal doesn't seem to be getting the same amount of coverage, obviously, that Nixon's did, as well as what Cuomo's sexual misconduct allegations have gotten. But if you haven't heard the details of this, then you should. So I'm gonna just check out some of the highlights of this article for you, and of course I'll put the link uh, to it in the description as always. But Sirota says that Cuomo didn't merely wildly mismanage his state's response to the COVID emergency while netting himself a lucrative book deal and an Emmy, uh, which is, you know, amazing because New York had one of the worst death rates due to COVID of any state in the country, and yet he was lauded for his response to COVID. But he did something much worse than that, even. Um, Not only did he mismanage the New York's response to the COVID emergency, resulting in thousands of needless deaths, but he used his office to help one of his largest political donors shield itself from legal consequences while 15,000 nursing home residents died from COVID. Which, by the way, is 3 times more just in nursing homes in New York than died from COVID in all of China, which is another interesting uh, issue. Um, and then he and his administration underreported the death toll. So it's actually more than that, helping the same donor avoid any criticism or liability. The scandal is a cautionary tale of hubris, megalomania, and corruption that left a literal mountain of preventable COVID deaths in its wake. So you may remember Cuomo's press conferences where he had a you know sort of mock-up of a mountain that represented deaths from COVID, and it really was a mountain. So I don't know if that was as great a PR move as he thought it was, but it went way up, and then it went steeply down after New York finally belatedly not only locked down but then eventually implemented a mask mandate, which steepened the decline in deaths. But you know, of course, we know the story of not only Cuomo but many other elected officials prematurely celebrating their tamping down the number of COVID deaths, only to have the rate of COVID cases skyrocket in late summer and fall, and especially winter of this year. Anyway, so Sirota goes on to say, now we're about to see whether a blue state's democratic institutions can hold wrongdoers accountable, or whether America's culture of impunity can once again protect the powerful from facing any consequences at all, as we see in Michigan, where the equally corrupt former Governor Rick Snyder is being shielded from liability for his role in the enormous public health crisis and deaths and health problems ensuing from his administration's changing the source of Flint, Michigan's water, resulting in an outbreak of lead poisoning and deadly diseases and so forth. And then the subsequent Democratic governor, Chris, what's her name, Whitmer, basically sort of whitewashed the investigation of this former Republican governor, resulting in his getting, it looks like basically a slap on the wrist, which, that's just typical of the utter unaccountability of American elected officials. But, it may be catching up with Cuomo. So there were quite a few demands for Cuomo to resign among state legislators in New York, and word of a potential federal investigation into the matter, which I believe is actually taking place now. So Cuomo and his aides are frantically trying to cover up the basic facts of what happened, and that includes launching a Nixonian campaign of intimidation and retribution against Democratic lawmakers who have for months been sounding the alarm. So that's where the comparison to Nixon that Sirota makes comes from, is that Cuomo has a habit of trying to get revenge on people who try to call out his corruption. 2 national news outlets today detail Cuomo's new campaign of retribution against one lawmaker whose name is Ron. I'm trying to find it here. Ron Lynn, I think. Anyway, a campaign of retribution against one lawmaker in his own party who dared to ask questions about constituents and family members, including his own uncle, who died under Cuomo's nursing home policies. Cuomo held a press conference to publicly berate the same Democrat, while another New York news outlet reported that other lawmakers are now facing threats. For months, these legislators' questions were ignored by a national media that has seemed far more interested in valorizing Cuomo than in reporting inconvenient facts, um, such as having his own brother give him softball interviews on CNN frequently throughout the early stages of the pandemic, while meanwhile he's responsible for all these people dying in nursing homes. The facts are worth reviewing because they illustrate the direct link between the underreporting of nursing home deaths and the push for corporate immunity. So some facts about this. Fact number one, Cuomo's political machine raked in $2 million from the industry group, the Greater New York Hospital Association, and its executives and lobbying firms. And they also contributed a lot to members of the New York legislature, but especially to Cuomo. Fact two, Cuomo helped that industry group shield nursing home execs from any liability. Amid New York's exploding COVID death toll in April 2020, Cuomo's budget included a provision shielding hospital and nursing home executives from legal consequences if their corporate decisions killed people during the pandemic. So essentially, incentivizing these corporate executives to pursue reckless policies that endangered people's lives but increased their profits, such as perhaps not providing proper protective equipment for their employees. Fact three, Cuomo's corporate immunity law went national. Cuomo's corporate immunity provision was quickly copied and pasted into other states' laws, and I believe I just heard this today. There's a scandal to that effect going on in Michigan. I haven't heard the details yet, but in any case, and also Senate Republicans copied Cuomo's legislation nearly word for word to try to shield people on a national level from liability for corporate decisions that endangered people. The liability shield spread from New York to other states, even as New York Assemblyman Ron Kim, okay, that's the fellow that Cuomo went after publicly and also called him up and threatened him that he was going to destroy him for trying to bring to light Cuomo's corruption. Ron Kim released a report showing that states with liability shields were reporting higher nursing home death rates during the pandemic. To date, 27 states have now shielded nursing homes from lawsuits. And unfortunately, even though there's a link here, I haven't been able to locate either in that link or anywhere else a list of the states that have liability shield laws in place to shield nursing homes from lawsuits. So if anybody has heard about any such information, that would be great to know. Anyway, fact four, Cuomo's immunity law endangered lives, according to the Attorney General. While nursing home executives were enjoying their liability shield, Cuomo's office was vastly underreporting the number of COVID nursing home deaths, according to a report by New York Attorney General Letitia James, who is considered a Cuomo ally as part of his administration. That report found that Cuomo administration data had undercounted nursing home deaths by 50%. James's report also showed how Cuomo's corporate immunity law could result in higher rates of nursing home casualties. Because it provides financial incentives to, especially for-profit nursing home operators, which, by the way, it's been shown that for-profit nursing homes have higher death rates among their residents from COVID. The provisions provide financial incentives to for-profit nursing home operators to put residents at risk of harm by refraining from investing public funds to obtain sufficient staffing to meet residents' care needs, to purchase sufficient personal protective equipment for staff, and to provide effective training to staff to comply with infection control protocols. And the fifth fact, Cuomo's top aide, Melissa DeRosa, admitted to withholding information. That's how this scandal really blew up, even though, um, interestingly enough, Assemblyman Kim, the state legislator who tried to hold Cuomo to account, um, went out of his way to try and bring this to public attention and get the corporate news media to cover it. And as we so often talk about on this show, the media really failed to do so to any significant extent, instead giving this ass-kissing coverage, this fawning coverage of Cuomo that turned him into some sort of celebrity who supposedly handled this pandemic well, which was horseshit. Um, and he even Ron Kim even went to the United Nations to try to file a human rights report on Cuomo's administration. So that's how desperate he was to get somebody to pay attention to it. But finally, Cuomo's top aide went public with the details of the cover-up, admitting to the press that Cuomo's administration not only withheld information about nursing home deaths, but did so in order to preemptively avoid political and legal consequences. In the last few days, as of the date of this article, which was mid-February, I believe, Cuomo has refused to apologize or support any serious effort to fix things. Instead, he is deploying his political machine against Democratic legislators who have been bravely demanding answers. Another Democratic legislator, State Senator Alessandra Biaggi, said she was concerned about a potential link between a Greater New York Hospital Administration campaign cash and Cuomo's corporate immunity law, and Cuomo promptly deployed his spokesperson to attack her. Assemblyman Kim's uncle died of COVID in a nursing home. This horrible policy has affected him personally. But it's all part of one big scandal where undercounting of nursing home deaths and the corporate immunity law prioritize protecting Cuomo's political sponsors rather than protecting the public. Okay, so that's one scandal. Now let's talk about the other one. So Lindsey Boylan is a former top aide to Governor Cuomo, and as you might guess, she's an attractive young woman. So she wrote about how she had been sexually harassed for years by Governor Cuomo, and was really afraid to speak out. But I'll read some of this because this account of her experience that she published, because it's a real horror story. "Let's play strip poker," Cuomo said to Lindsey Boylan. "I should have been shocked by the governor's crude comment, but I wasn't. We were flying home from an October 2017 event in Western New York on his taxpayer-funded jet. He was seated facing me, so close our knees almost touched. His press aide was to my right and a state trooper behind us. That's exactly what I was thinking," I responded sarcastically and awkwardly. I tried to play it cool, but in that moment I realized just how acquiescent I had become. Governor Cuomo has created a culture within his administration where sexual harassment and bullying is so pervasive that it is not only condoned but expected. His inappropriate behavior toward women was an affirmation that he liked you, that you must be doing something right. He used intimidation to silence his critics, and if you dared to speak up, you would face consequences. That's why I panicked on the morning of December 13th, when she went public, finally, in December 13th of last year, with her allegations about Cuomo's sexual harassment. While enjoying a weekend with my husband and daughter, I spontaneously decided to share a small part of the truth that I had hidden for so long in shame and never planned to disclose. The night before, a former Cuomo staffer confided to me that she too had been the subject of the governor's workplace harassment. Her story mirrored my own. Seeing his name floated as a potential candidate for U.S. Attorney General set me off. And apparently there are many, many stories of sexual harassment by Andrew Cuomo of various women, and it's an open secret in New York government circles that women should stay away from Cuomo. So anyway, she goes on, in a few tweets, I told the world what a few close friends, family members, and my therapist had known for years. Andrew Cuomo abused his power as governor to sexually harass me just as he had done with so many other women. As messages from journalists buzzed on my phone, I laid in bed unable to move. I finally decided to speak up, but at what cost? Parts of a supposed confidential personnel file, which I've never seen, were leaked to the media in an effort to smear me. Sounds very reminiscent of how journalists and others went after Tara Reade, and when she accused Joe Biden of sexually assaulting her, and leaked personal information about Tara in an effort to smear her. The governor's loyalists called around town asking about me. Last week, Assemblymember Ron Kim spoke out publicly about the intimidation he abuse he has faced from Governor Cuomo and his aides. As Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City remarked, the bullying is nothing new. There are many more of us, but most are too afraid to speak up, as she was, of course, for a long time. I'm compelled to tell my story because no woman should feel forced to hide their experiences of workplace intimidation, harassment, and humiliation, not by the governor or anyone else. I expect the governor and his top aides will attempt to further disparage me, just as they've done with Assemblymember Kim. They'd lose their jobs if they didn't protect him. That's how his administration works. I know because I was a part of it. I joined state government in 2015 as a vice president at Empire State Development. I was quickly promoted to chief of staff at the State Economic Development Agency. The news of my appointment prompted a warning from a friend who has served as an executive with an influential civic engagement organization. Be careful around the governor. She talks about her first encounter with the governor where there were a whole bunch of people listening to a speech, and after his speech he'd never met her before, but he came right up to her and started talking to her, and she was surprised by how much attention he paid to someone he didn't even know. My boss soon informed me that the governor had a crush on me, quote unquote, she said. It was an uncomfortable but all too familiar feeling. The struggle to be taken seriously by a powerful man who tied my worth to my body and my appearance. And so Stephanie Benton, the director of the governor's office, told her in an email that the governor's former girlfriend named Lisa looked a lot like Lindsay. They could be sisters, but that Lindsay was a better looking sister, better looking than the governor's former girlfriend. The governor began calling me Lisa in front of colleagues. It was degrading. And here's a copy of the email. So she talks about her trip, and so the aide, Stephanie Benton, says this irrelevant thing about the governor talking about how good-looking Lindsay was. I complained to friends that the governor would go out of his way to touch me on my lower back, arms, and legs. His senior staff began keeping tabs on my whereabouts. He is a sexist pig and you should avoid being alone with him, my mother texted me on November 4th, 2016. Here's the tweet from her mother. Whoops, what did I do here? Darn it. Okay. Yeah, what's amazing about these accounts of Governor Cuomo's sexual harassment from all three of the women who so far have accused him of it is that they and their friends and colleagues kept detailed records of all this. So, he's actually had to kind of sort of confess, although, he denies sexually harassing them. He's confessed to some of the events that have happened. The governor's behavior made me nervous, but I didn't truly fear him until December 2016. Senior state employees gathered at the Empire State Plaza Convention Center in Albany to celebrate the holidays and our year's work. After his remarks, the governor spotted me in a room filled with hundreds of people waiting to shake his hand. As he began to approach me, I excused myself from coworkers and basically tried to uh, move away and avoid him. Minutes later, I received a call from an unlisted number. It was the governor's bodyguard. He told me to come to the Capitol because the governor wanted to see me. Um, so she called her husband, said she was afraid of what might happen because she was afraid she'd wind up being alone with the governor. Um, so she asked the security person, are there cameras here? She was worried that she would be left alone with the governor. She had no idea of why the governor had summoned her. I was escorted into the governor's office, etc. The door closed behind me. It was my first time in his Albany office. The governor entered the room from another door, and surprise, surprise, we were alone. As he showed me around, I tried to maintain my distance. He paused at one point and smirked as he showed off a cigar box, which he told me President Clinton had given to him while he served as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under Clinton. The two-decade-old reference to President Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky was not lost on me. Um, the governor must have sensed my fear because he finally let me out of the office. So, basically, he's kind of grooming her here, bringing up this veiled reference to Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky, where he famously penetrated her with his cigar. Um, so, he's trying to imply that he might be interested in a relationship with this younger woman, he meaning Cuomo. In 2018, I was promoted to Deputy Secretary for Economic Development and Special Advisor to the Governor. I initially turned down the job because I didn't want to be near the Governor. I finally accepted the position at the Governor's insistence with one requirement. I would keep my old agency office and remain on a separate floor from him and his inner circle. The governor's pervasive harassment extended beyond just me. He made unflattering comments about the weight of female colleagues. He ridiculed them about their romantic relationships and significant others. He said the reasons that men get women were money and power. I tried to excuse his behavior. I told myself it's only words. But that changed after a one-on-one briefing with the governor. We were in his New York City office. As I got up to leave and walked toward an open door, he stepped in front of me and kissed me on the lips. After that, my fears worsened. Great, what is going on here? Yeah. Holy shit. Alright. I have to go back to her website. Let's see if I can get it back this way. Sorry about that. Okay, oh my god. Okay, well, medium.com is not cooperating here. So let's see if I can. One more time. Lindsay Boylan, my story of. Holy shit. Okay. Okay, I give up. So she goes on to say that this um, episode with the governor really frightened her. It traumatized her. She suffers psychological consequences from it to this day. Um, she's in therapy, uh, and she eventually quit working for the government. But even though she got a transfer to another office that didn't have anything to do with the governor, just the stress of being there in that environment where she knew the governor was and was afraid of running into him. She couldn't take it anymore, so she quit. Let me see one more time if I can get this back. This is ridiculous. So she said her fears worsened. She came to work nauseous every day, uh, and they started retaliating against her for you know um, not taking the governor's harassment of her in stride, apparently. My relationship with the senior team, mostly women, grew hostile after I started speaking up for myself. I was reprimanded and told to get in line by his top aides, but I could no longer ignore it. On September 26, 2018, I sent a mass email informing staff members of my resignation. Um, He said it was also normalized, particularly by Melissa DeRosa and other top women around him. So, DeRosa, you may recall, is the same woman who finally admitted to the cover up of the underreporting of the nursing home deaths. Only now do I realize how insidious his abuse was. After my tweets about the governor in December, two women reached out to me with their own experiences. And I don't think that either of those two women are among those who came forward. But one described how she lived in constant fear, scared of what would happen to her if she rejected the governor's advances. The other said she was instructed by the governor to warn staff members who upset him that their jobs could be at risk. Both told me they are too afraid to speak out. Um, so that's one story. Uh, and the first person, I'm guessing she's probably in her 30s, and she's now running for political office, and is being very strong and willing to speak out. But she was smeared when she first came out with her story in December, and finally, you know, after the scandal about the handling of COVID and the cover up and all that became more prominent. She came out with her Medium post that shared more details of her story than she had initially. Um, and then right after that, Cuomo was accused of sexual harassment by a second former aide, um, Charlotte Bennett, 25. Said that when they were alone in his office, Governor Cuomo asked if she had, quote, ever been with an older man. Um, Asked her questions about her sex life, whether she was monogamous in her relationships, and if she'd ever had sex with older men. Whether she thought age made a difference in romantic relationships. Told her that he was open to relationships with women in their 20s. And basically, she interpreted his comments as clear overtures to a sexual relationship. He said Cuomo didn't try to touch her, but the message of the episode was unmistakable to her that the governor wanted to sleep with her. I felt horribly uncomfortable and scared, Ms. Bennett said. I really want to emphasize that according to her, he never touched her, but nonetheless, his pattern of persistently engaging in even this sort of low-level harassment, where he implied that he really wanted to sleep with her, um, you know, uh, made her super uncomfortable and scared because there's this very powerful man uh, engaging in unwanted hitting on you. I was wondering how I was going to get out of it and assumed it was the end of my job. Ms. Bennett said she had disclosed the interaction with Mr. Cuomo to his chief of staff, Jill DeRosers, less than a week later, and was transferred to another job with an office on the opposite side of the Capitol soon after that. Fortunately, she was able to find a staff member, his chief of staff, who was sympathetic and probably knows that Cuomo's a creep. I almost said Biden, which Biden's a creep too, as we've talked about on this show before. Um, so, so Cuomo, came out with a public statement about all this because it was just getting too hot for him to not say anything. Um, Cuomo said that Ms. Bennett had spoken to him about it being a sexual assault survivor, an experience about which she'd been open in the past, and that he had supposedly tried to be supportive and helpful. The last thing I would ever have wanted was to make her feel any of the things that are being reported, the governor claimed. And the governor did not deny that he asked Ms. Bennett personal questions. He said in a statement that he would have no further comment until the review concluded. Um, okay, so they go on to talk about the other allegation from Ms. Boylan. Um, and Charlotte Bennett linked to Lindsay Boylan's story and said, for those wondering what it's like to work for the Cuomo men, read Lindsay Boylan's story. So Boylan wouldn't do an interview with the press. She said, well, my Medium post speaks for itself, so read that and report on that. So the Times contacted Charlotte Bennett, and she agreed to do an interview. She said she felt an obligation to other victims of sexual harassment and wanted to counter the way Mr. Cuomo wields his power. She said she had told her parents and friends about the exchange with the governor around the time that it happened, as well as about her growing discomfort with having to work closely with him, and had kept text messages from that period. The Times reviewed the message and confirmed their contents with those who received them. So she had everything documented, just like Lindsay Boylan had. And so as I mentioned, she had talked with Governor Cuomo about being a sexual assault survivor herself. She had graduated from Hamilton College in 2017, where she was active in women's issues and founded a sexual misconduct task force. She said her own experience in surviving a sexual attack had prompted her to help sexual assault survivors be heard and enforce victims' rights. So she said, she saw Cuomo as a father figure, had a close friendship with him, but it was kind of getting to her, just some of the questions he asked her about her dating life and other really personal things. But then, he engaged in the conversation with her that I mentioned previously. They talked about her experience as a survivor of sexual assault, and she was talking about a speech she was scheduled to give to students at her alma mater about that experience, and was taken aback by Cuomo's seeming fixation on that element of her life experience. The way he was repeating, "You were raped and abused and attacked and assaulted and betrayed," over and over again, while looking me directly in the eyes, was something out of a horror movie. She wrote in a second text to her friend that she had told about other incidents. It was like he was testing me. In retrospect, she said she viewed that meeting as the turning point in our relationship. Anything before it, I now see differently. She said, I now understand that he was grooming her for a possible sexual relationship. 3 weeks later, she was summoned to Cuomo's office, along with another woman. But then, conveniently enough, the other woman left. And when they finished with the work they were engaged in, he asked her to turn off the recorder. And he started talking about this and that, and then started to ask her questions about her personal life, such as those I mentioned earlier. So then she texted a friend of hers about the incident, and the Times reporters looked at the text and confirmed that they were authentic. And in the text, she told her friend that she was shaken and upset by the episode and worried about even writing it down. And so her friend asked not to be identified for fear of retribution, but confirmed the text content and validity to the New York Times. When her friend asked whether Mr. Cuomo had done anything physical to Ms. Bennett, she responded, "But no, but it was like the most explicit it could be." And so the conversation continued. Cuomo told her he was lonely because his girlfriend had dumped him, and asked her all this stuff about whether she thought age differences in relationships mattered, and if she'd ever been in a relationship with an older man, and that he was fine with being in a relationship with anyone above the age of 22, which she was. She said that she felt deeply uncomfortable with Mr. Cuomo's comments and tried to shift the conversation into neutral territory, something not about my sex life, she recalled. And so it goes on. She told her parents about the encounter. Her mom said she was obviously very upset, etc. Okay, but there's more. Because a third woman came out with a story about Cuomo. This time, someone who Cuomo didn't even know at all. It was just somebody he ran into at a wedding. Anna Rook had never met Governor Andrew Cuomo before encountering him at a crowded New York City wedding reception in September 2019. Her first impression was positive enough. The governor was working the room after toasting the newlyweds, and when he came upon Ms. Rook, now 33, she thanked him for his kind words about her friends. But what happened next instantly unsettled her. Mr. Cuomo put his hand on Ms. Rook's bare lower back. When she removed his hand with her own, she recalled, the governor remarked that she seemed aggressive and placed his hands on her cheeks and asked her if he could kiss her. Loudly enough for a friend standing nearby, who fortunately had a camera out, to hear. Ms. Rook was bewildered by the entreaty, she said, and pulled away as the governor drew closer, and evidently, according to the friend, kissed her on the cheek. She doesn't really remember. I was so confused and shocked and embarrassed, she said. Her recollection was corroborated by the friend, contemporaneous text messages and photographs from the event. I turned my head away and didn't have any words in that moment. So here's one of the pictures. You can see Cuomo there grabbing her by the cheeks, and apparently right after that he kissed her, and you can see there she looks extremely uncomfortable. So there was this statement that Cuomo had released just before this third woman came out, in which he acknowledged that some things he had said, not mentioning any of the touching, which he denied, have been misinterpreted as an unwanted flirtation. To the extent anyone felt that way, I am truly sorry about that. So basically, he's saying, I'm sorry that you were too stupid to understand that I wasn't actually flirting with you. It's basically what his quote-unquote apology was to these women. Ms. Rook's example is distinct from those of the former aides. She had never been employed by the governor. Just randomly met him at this wedding. Um, so the second person who came out, Charlotte Bennett, made a public statement in response to Cuomo's pseudo apology slash denial. Uh, she said the apology and an attempted explanation issued by the governor was woefully inadequate. Those are not the actions of someone who simply feels misunderstood, she wrote. They are the actions of an individual who wields his power to avoid justice. She also called on other women, if they had similar stories about Cuomo, to come forward. If you choose to speak your truth, we will be standing with you, I promise. Okay, so, I'll put a link to this article so you can um, see the details of what he said and how shitty it was. So Bennett's lawyer, who, as it turns out, was also Christine Blasey Ford's lawyer in the Supreme Court confirmations of Brett Kavanaugh, also made a public statement. She said he was not acting as a mentor and his remarks were not understood by Ms. Bennett. He was abusing his power over her for sex. This is textbook sexual harassment. The mayor of New York, who's been critical of Cuomo for a long time, said that the governor's statement was not an apology. He seemed to be saying, "Oh, I was just kidding around." De Blasio said, "Sexual harassment isn't funny. It's serious and it has to be taken seriously." However, so far, only one member of Congress, Representative Kathleen Rice from New York, has called on Cuomo to resign. Interestingly, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who supposedly is a defender of women's rights and has been sexually assaulted herself, has called for an investigation but hasn't called on Cuomo to resign. Let's see. Oh, I didn't catch this before. She texted later to her friend. She didn't until later really think about it as her friend looked very concerned about her, just how inappropriate the governor was, not only to her but to those around her, because it was just right there in front of a bunch of people. He tried to kiss her and said inappropriate things. In a text message a day or so later to the friend, Ms. Rook wrote, "I'm so pissed," referring to the governor as this guy, this fucking guy, I assume, with an epithet in that description. After collecting herself later that night, she said she had hoped to speak with the governor before he left the reception and confront him about his behavior. But by then, she said she could not find him. "I would have rather just said it that night," she said. "I wanted to say that wasn't okay." RT, so obviously this is all Russian propaganda campaign against Cuomo, right? Since RT is covering it. Cuomo accused of gaslighting after he rejects sexual harassment allegations as, quote, jokes and being playful. The article is headlined. The mea culpa of his so-called apology did not sit well with those critical of the governor, sparking a fresh wave of indignation. New York City Council Deputy Leader Jimmy Van Bramer tweeted that Cuomo had implicated himself with his statement, accusing him of justifying sexual harassment as well-intentioned humor. "It doesn't absolve him, it implicates him," he wrote. A member of a sexual harassment working group in New York, Eric Vladimir, said, "This is an absolutely disgusting gaslighting response. No ownership of his actions. Blame his victims for, quote, misinterpreting his, quote, playfulness." And Not sure which one I want to look at next. And it's interesting to compare the, you know, finally at least the allegations against Cuomo being taken seriously with the whole smear campaign against Tara Reade, who alleged that Joe Biden raped her. That the New York Times aided and abetted, and so this columnist Michelle Goldberg was one of a number of Times columnists who smeared Tara Reade, and she just wrote an article the other day, uh, attempting to summarize why Democrats are not overwhelmingly calling for the resignation of Governor Cuomo amid the sexual misconduct scandals. She began her column by saying it, quote, seems obvious enough that allegations of sexual harassment and inappropriate advances against Cuomo are credible, and it's hard to imagine how an inquiry could exonerate the governor. Um, and then she went on to say Tara Reade made allegations against Joe Biden, which got national attention, but turned out to be full of inconsistencies. It's unclear what Goldberg meant by her statement that Reade's allegations against the now sitting president were full of inconsistencies. Critics slammed the Times columnist, with some on social media accusing her of throwing Reade under the bus. Goldberg was a major part of this media push, one columnist said, typically by claiming that Reade's story had ambiguities or was inconsistent when compared to Christine Blasey Ford, who she personally championed. But in fact, anyone who looked at the facts of the case knows that Blasey Ford, who I find credible, Branko Marcic said, had many inconsistencies in her story. One of the things the Republicans used against her, didn't tell her story for decades, not even to her husband, and 3 key witnesses said they couldn't remember the party where the attempted rape allegedly happened. But he continued, at the time there were reams of pages from liberal columnists explaining why this didn't make Ford uncredible, all of which they reversed on when it came to Reade and Biden. It's that if they mentally heaved all of Ford's issues onto Reade, who had a lot of corroborating evidence. Because it's actually commonplace for women who've been sexually assaulted to not necessarily remember all the details of their story, just like we all don't necessarily remember the details of even significant things that have happened to us, to have inconsistencies in their stories and so forth, and yet still being telling the truth, and still having the basic gist of their story be consistent and be corroborated and so forth. Well, Blasey Ford didn't have corroboration. Tara Reade did. The death of Me Too is because it never was. Actress Rose McGowan, who's been a big supporter of Tara Reade, chimed in. It is a communication tool. It is truth. Me and Tara Reade are a movement. Liars like you, Michelle Brooklyn, and Alyssa Milano, are classist frauds who shame others who don't pass your twisted standards of purity. Siri, show me a self-identified feminist who destroyed #MeToo by engaging in rank hypocrisy, including but not limited to applying the exact argument against Tara Reade that Republicans used against Blasey Ford, and who projects her guilt onto Reade, whom she threw under the bus. Katie Halper of the Katie Halper Show said. So anyway. Let's see. As you might expect, Fox News has been all over this story, whereas the Democrat-affiliated major networks not so much. Same with the New York Post. De Blasio and Cuomo's behavior. I've talked to U.S. presidents. No one acts like this, he said. Just the threatening of people, the egomania. Just, I mean, To see that someone may have literally used their power over a young woman, the fact she was an employee, to try to insinuate she should certainly have had a sexual relationship with him. That's how Charlotte Bennett heard it, and I don't blame her given the details we heard. That sounds exactly like what was being said. That's unacceptable behavior. Come on, that's just not acceptable behavior in today's society, de Blasio said. So, I tell you all this just to make clear that this is being taken very seriously, unlike the allegations against Joe Biden, who, at least by Democrats, who you'll recall was accused not just by Tara Reade, but by several other women of sexual harassment at the very least, or groping of some sort. Have been Secret Service agents who've said that Biden grabbed their girlfriends or wives by the ass or breasts at parties. He's been accused of parading around naked in front of female Secret Service agents at his home in Delaware. There are numerous photos and videos of him behaving very inappropriately, both in terms of what he said and inappropriate touching of girls as young as like 10 years old, at public events, and yet Biden gets off scot-free so far, and conversely, his accusers, not just Tara Reade, but some of the others, have been smeared, personally attacked. And their credibility rather than Biden's has been called into question. So, why is it different with Cuomo? It's an interesting question, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I just wanted to share one other article with you. How Democrats Killed #MeToo by an Australian columnist, Ryan Cooper. So there's a picture of Cuomo. A few Democrats and institutions like the Working Families Party have since called on Cuomo to resign after all this came out about the sexual harassment allegations, sexual assault. A few Democrats and institutions like the Working Families Party have called on Cuomo to resign, which only a handful of people were in light of the nursing home scandal. But things have kind of escalated following the sexual harassment allegations going public. But so far, the party elite, particularly President Biden and Vice President Harris, surprise there, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi have not called on Cuomo to resign. Unless Cuomo is actually indicted for violating criminal law due to the nursing home cover-up, it appears unlikely he will choose to resign on his own. The #MeToo movement is running aground on the rocks of Democratic political convenience. So he points out in response to Michelle Goldberg's column that I mentioned earlier that the claim that her story was full of inconsistencies is misleading. Nobody actually disproved Reade's story. One of the primary lessons supposedly learned during the avalanche of stories in 2017 and 19 was that victims are routinely somewhat inconsistent in telling their stories. Severe trauma tends to create memory distortions, or people may leave details out due to fear of not being believed, or they might have psychological problems stemming from the assault. So remember, the first woman who came out against Cuomo is really suffering from it even to this day, in therapy for it and so forth. Even though, what happened to her is arguably not as serious as what happened to Tara Reade. It was still pretty horrible. Thus, the general guideline of believe women. In that sense, Reade's story was no different. She had a consistent basic narrative of being digitally raped by Biden in 1993 while working in his Senate office, which 3 people corroborated she had told him around that time. In reality, what allowed loyal Democrats to dismiss Reade was reporters snooping into her personal history. This hostile coverage created an impression of doubt, which fueled a narrative that the accusation had been conclusively disproved, which allowed liberals to relieve their cognitive dissonance and dismiss the whole thing. The same thing happened on the Republican side with Trump, although there wasn't nearly a smear campaign against Trump's accusers. He points out that there was against Biden's accusers. This kind of dynamic is a big reason why Me Too happened in the first place, that rich, powerful men often, when they're accused of sexual misconduct, their accusers are smeared in the press. That happened to the accusers of Harvey Weinstein, the film director, leading many victims to simply clam up instead and predators to go unpunished. Why bother coming forward when one's reputation will be ruined and nobody will believe it anyway? In any case, the Reid story is partly beside the point because Biden has also been accused of Cuomo-style harassment by other people. He's infamous for being publicly handsy with women and girls, and even apologized for doing so, etc. It would thus be baldly hypocritical to ask Cuomo to resign for kissing people against their will, but not asking the same thing of Biden. So elite Democrats, it seems, have decided to look the other way at both. He's not really sure what's going to happen. But he said, Cuomo appears to be benefiting from lingering frustration among liberals who are still mad about Al Franken being pushed to resign from the Senate after numerous women accused him of sexual harassment. Goldberg, the New York Times columnist, describes tremendous bitterness towards people like Senator Christian Gillibrand, in keeping with, many Democrats are sick of holding themselves to a set of standards that Republicans feel no need to try to meet, she wrote. Here we get down to the nitty-gritty in the last part of the article. I'll just kind of summarize it. Basically, I think the difference between what happened to Tara Reid and also to a lesser extent happened with other accusers of Joe Biden, but especially to Tara Reid, and what's happening with the scandals with Cuomo, is that at the time that Tara Reid came out with her story of being digitally raped by Biden, the Democratic Party had decided, this is our guy. We have to support Joe Biden because the only viable alternative at this point is Bernie Sanders, and we don't want him. They felt like Biden was irreplaceable, that there's nobody else that could beat Bernie Sanders at that point in the Democratic primaries last February and March. March being when Tara Reid came out with her story, February being when they decided to go all in on Biden, and you had all these other candidates dropping out and endorsing Biden, and even Tulsi Gabbard, who among all the Democratic candidates was the one that I felt had the most integrity, unfortunately dropped out and endorsed Biden as well. So, they all, every single prominent Democrat in the entire country got behind Joe Biden to one extent or another, or at least refused to criticize him to any significant degree. That really shows you how the prominent members of the Democratic Party really are willing to throw any principle and any person under the bus if it seems like the politically convenient or opportune thing to do, because they all knew about Tara Reid's story, and they knew about the other allegations against Joe Biden. In fact, Kamala Harris herself had spoken up about the various allegations, including Tara Reid's allegations of harassment that came out in April of 2019, and said she believed those women. But fast forward to 2020, in the heat of the Democratic primary, with Bernie Sanders pulling off wins in the first three primaries and looking like he might run away with it. All of a sudden her tune and that of everyone else is changed to we support Joe Biden, or to being silent about Tara Reade's and other women's allegations against Joe Biden, um, you know, because Biden was indispensable. Bernie Sanders had to be beaten, which is not to say, because I've criticized Bernie a lot on the show before, that Bernie Sanders doesn't have major flaws. But regardless of that, he was the one who the Democratic establishment, uh, you know, decided they had to stop, and even anti-establishment people like Tulsi Gabbard wouldn't speak out against Biden because, you know, by that point they uh, perhaps felt they didn't want to get kind of run over by the steamroller, or the juggernaut that the effort to defeat Bernie Sanders, um, and in addition, Trump, of course, involved. Of course, in Gabbard's case, there were also some sour grapes because so many of the higher ups in Sanders' campaign had, personally attacked her. So, anyway, I don't want to get into all that. But so Biden was indispensable, but it looks like, as uh, the author of this article says here, Franken, as well as Cuomo today, are actually easily replaceable. Um, you know, anybody could do Cuomo's job better than he could, as far as New York political officials are concerned. You could find lots of people. I should say not anybody, but lots of people could do a better job than Cuomo has. You not have one of the highest death tolls in response to a public health crisis of any state in the United States, which in every state has handled it horribly, and also not go around sexually harassing every young woman they come into contact with. Um, but we'll see what happens. You know, I don't know for sure whether Cuomo is going to be pushed out, because it's entirely possible that the current state of affairs, where it's only uh, Democrats at the state and local level in New York that are pushing Cuomo to resign, some Republicans too, obviously. Um, whereas you haven't heard much call from national Democrats. Only one member of Congress so far has called on him to resign. Some folks in Congress have called for an investigation. I think, actually, ironically, Joe Biden has called for an investigation of Cuomo. Um, and, of course, mum's a word about whether there should be an investigation of Biden himself. The corporate media is not going to talk about that. Um, but in any case, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I have my hopes up that if they can derail Neera Tanden's nomination to be Joe Biden's Office of Management and Budget Director, even though unfortunately the reasons had to do with her nasty nasty tweets about various politicians, rather than because of her corruption and so forth. At least she went down to defeat, and so maybe we can hold out hope that Cuomo will be forced out too. At the very least, I don't think he's going to be running for president in 2024 like people were talking about a lot last year. It seems doubtful that he could get reelected governor. He's up for reelection in 2022, but we'll have to see. Um, yeah, but there's been an enormous amount of damage to the Me Too movement. To hold powerful men accountable for their sexual misconduct, as the author of this article describes, and you know, I think that how powerful institutions and people respond to these allegations against Cuomo, um, not just the sexual misconduct allegations, but the you know, far more serious in terms of actually resulting in people's deaths. Allegations against him regarding his handling of COVID. Will he be held accountable? We'll have to wait and see. I hope so. All right, that's enough for today. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Please like and share and subscribe. Take it easy.